Hi, it's Matt. I'm back with another transparent watercolor. This is a 7 by 10 inch painting of a pine siskin. I got photos of this guy in our backyard from the kitchen window. We tend to get a lot of these guys in the winter, and they're always fun to see. I started off the painting by frisketing off the main parts of the foreground and then doing a wash on dry paper with several pre-mixed colors. And I worked pretty quickly to establish the blurriest parts, so the colors had a chance to mix on the page. And then as I got further down, I wanted to have a little bit more crisp edges. So I started bringing the paint in little splotches. And then as that started to dry on the paper, you'll see that the paper is starting to dry because it's losing the sheen. If I start putting the paint in now, I'll start having some hard edges show up as the pigments creep across the page. And that can be a fun way to have some accidental looking areas that look like leaves but don't take a heck of a lot of time to create. Kind of is a good compromise between a realistic treatment and letting the paint do some of the work for you. So I spared some of these areas where there were going to be some foreground blurry flower clusters. And so you see that I'm dropping in some of those with some reflected sky colors with the blues. Most of this work I'm doing with the number 6 round brush. And again, I'm putting in more pigments as I go, hoping to get some of those intentional backruns to have the portions of it be smooth and other portions have hard edges lining up. Here I was just picking away some parts of the blue sky that puddled up at the bird's beak, evening those out. Once I was happy with the background as a whole, I peeled off some of the middle ground elements and started to paint those in. I often think that with these paintings you're best off having a background, a middle ground, and then the foreground. And those layers add to some of the realism and some of the interest, at least for me, when I'm doing these. And I think that gives your eye a chance to interpret some of these blurs as kind of other clumps of leaves, and other areas have less detail and some have more, and it just gives some good passages for the eye to walk through. So here I'd switch to a number 2 round brush to do some of these smaller details. Once I was happy with those, I removed the rest of the frisket from the painting and transferred the rest of my sketch onto the paper using tracing paper. And at this point I frisketed off a couple of areas where I could preserve the closest areas of the foreground and paint over the trunk of the tree and the bird more quickly without having to worry about ruining some of those other areas. And my goal at this point was cover as much of the paper with the lightest local tones first, so I could build up the color quickly and not have the white of the paper staring me in the eye. And most of this was done with a number 6 round brush at this phase. And I'll hit it with the hairdryer in between just so I can speed things up. You can see the photo reference on the left was taken, it was in the, I think this was a May shot, and it kind of has some browny stuff on the bottom. I kind of pushed that more in a green direction and made the blossoms a little bit bigger as if they were a couple days later. I thought that would make for a better image than kind of these browny things at the bottom, and would have something for the green of that trunk to play with the greens in the foreground. Now the overall part of the tree trunk had a lot of like this green algae. It wasn't quite a moss on there because it was just kind of this green sheen all over the bark. And I wanted to bring that in but still have some of the warmth to go with the bird. And so this kind of has a blend going from these greeny colors to some orangey browns with that burnt sienna in there, which was a little bit of a challenge, but it also made for just some interesting transitions in the painting. And those warms on the trunk would help bring in some of the warm colors on the Siskin, those yellows and kind of the brownie streaks along the bird. Streak birds are hard to do in watercolor. At least in a really detailed manner, they're complicated, but fun. One of the challenges in this painting was deciding how far to let things fade in the background as far as the tree trunk. And looking back at it, I'm not sure. I may have been better off leaving that back part of the trunk a little bit lighter, kind of where it is now, rather than darkening it up more as I went along. I think it ended up being a little bit heavy of a visual element up in the corner. But this painting had some challenges in it that I don't always run into. And part of that was my own fault, because I usually spend more time composing an image than I did on this one. This one I did the drawing based on the photo, and then I just kind of dove into it. And usually I spend a lot of time sweating where all the things are. And I probably would do the background a little differently if I had spent more time thinking about it and composing it. But here it is. It is what it is at this point. I'm changing it in watercolor. If this were an oil, you could probably paint over that and get going. But with this, it's you're committed. It is what it is. At this point, I'm working under the magnifier because there are so many tiny details. So when you see the side view like this, that meant that I needed to get in really close and look at what I was doing. And here I'm using, I think it's a 5/0 brush. The feet are always difficult on these. It's an area where you have a lot of detail in a small area, and if it goes wrong, they just look terrible. So I usually spend a lot more time on my feet than you would think. And had finally peeled the frisket off and started those little foreground elements of the little blossoms on the closest branch. And I was trying to find a balance with those of how much detail to put in and how much to leave out, because I didn't want them to be the main focus. So I'm trying to be reserved with that. Back to those feet. I went back and forth on the feet a few times, trying to figure out how much to push the trunk behind it dark and how much to keep the branch that he is sitting on dark, and trying to get it all so it made sense as you looked at it. And that was probably one of the more difficult parts of the painting. And really, toward the end of the painting, you're just putting in details with little dark, little speckles of paint. It's just little liney things that end up defining a lot of these edges. So a lot of time you spend looking at it and a lot less time actually putting the paint down. So there it is. That was another 7x10 inch painting. This is a pine siskin. Well, thanks for having a peek. If you get a chance, have a look at the blog and the website.